Today we're going to take a look at some towns that had their day in the sun but failed to hold on to it. That's right, we're looking at Boomtowns that went bust. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 12, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Now, this one's probably one of the most interesting ones on this list, but it was on the other one, so we just slipped it in here. The boom. Centralia thrived in the 19th and early 20th century as a coal mining town. The discovery of coal attracted workers and businesses, creating a bustling community with a population of around 2,700 people by 1890. This was a real boomtown for Pennsylvania. Most people not from Pennsylvania don't know that the Keystone State is the third largest producer of coal, only outdone by West Virginia and Wyoming at number 1. For some reason, you ask people where coal comes from and they seem to think it's just West Virginia. Nah, this whole part of the country, Pennsylvania is a major producer. The bust. The bust came in 1962. A coal mine fire accidentally ignited beneath the town, leading to an underground inferno that still burns to this day. The fire spread uncontrollably, releasing toxic gases that caused the ground to collapse. Despite efforts to extinguish it, the fire could not be contained. The dangerous conditions forced the government to evacuate and condemn the town in the 1980s, leaving Centralia nearly deserted with only a handful of residents remaining. Now, they struck a deal. Most of the people had to leave, but some that I guess were in semi-safe areas compared to where the fire in the mine was, were allowed to stay. They could never sell their property. They were just allowed to stay there till they passed away or moved away. At its peak in the 1890s, they had 2,700 people, like I'd said. Their current population is between 5 and 10 people. Number 11, Thurmond, West Virginia. This is another one that is related to coal. Most of the towns in West Virginia relied heavily on the coal industry for employment, basically their way of life. The boom. Thurmond was a thriving railroad town in the early 1900s, strategically located on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. The town boasted a busy rail yard, hotels, banks, and other businesses that catered to the coal industry and travelers. At its peak, Thurmond handled more freight than Cincinnati, Ohio, which is, I'm sure about 5 times as large at the time. The bust. The decline of the coal mining and the advent of diesel locomotives, which require less frequent stops, led to a steep decline in Thurmond's importance. The town's population dwindled as businesses closed and residents moved away. Today, Thurmond is a near ghost town, preserved as part of the River Gorge National Park. What's left of Thurmond sits on the New River, a little over an hour southeast of Charleston, West Virginia. You could actually stop there if you take the Amtrak. If you want to go from New York or Philadelphia to Chicago, or Chicago to Philadelphia or New York, it's the Cardinal line for Amtrak. They stop in Thurmond. I've never taken that line, but every video I've seen on it, they always stop and there's like 2 or 3 people getting on or off. It's not a major stop. I'm sure they'd like to get rid of it, but part of their agreement with the United States government is to serve the rural areas, so they got to keep it. The peak population for Thurmond, West Virginia was 500 people in the 1920s. Their current population, 5. Number 10, Cisco, Utah. The boom. Cisco was a bustling railroad town like so many abandoned towns in the late 19th century and early 20th century, serving as a key stop for steam locomotives, which I find strange because it's the middle of the desert and they got no water out there, but this is where they got their water supply, so seems like they should have got some water someplace else. The town also thrived as a shipping point for livestock and agricultural products from nearby ranches. Considering there's really nothing around Cisco, it was a pretty big town. Then it wasn't. The bust. The decline in the steam locomotives and the rerouting of rail lines led to Cisco's downfall. As the rail traffic decreased, businesses closed and the population dwindled. By the 1960s, people had started to leave, and by 1990, there was just one person left. Today it stands as a ghost town with only remnants of its former buildings remaining, but it still has one resident, a woman by the name of Eileen Musa. She bought it from an older gentleman some years back. About 4 years ago, Vice did a little documentary on her. She lives out there alone, and she always has a gun at her side, and her dog. And she's, I wouldn't say rebuilding the town, but she's making it work for her. She was living in an Airstream while she was rebuilding another camper, and she's built decks and bathrooms and things like that. It's really interesting. The latest update I have on her is in 2022, she was still living there. Cisco, Utah's peak population was 200 in the early 1900s, and their current population is either 0 or 1. It's considered a ghost town. Number 9, Tombstone, Arizona. The Boom. Tombstone was once the most famous boom town in the American Wild West, growing rapidly in the late 1870s due to silver mining. The town became notorious for its lawlessness and became even more famous by the gunfight at the OK Corral. At its peak, it had a population of over 7,000 people. The bust. The silver mines began to flood in the 1880s, leading to a decline in production. Combined with the legal troubles and the depletion of easily accessible water, Tombstone's economy collapsed. The population dwindled, and the town was on the verge of becoming a ghost town. However, it later revived as a tourist destination, capitalizing on its Wild West history. Very interesting. Tombstone trivia? Tombstone's famous Boot Hill Cemetery got its name because most of the men buried there died with their boots on, a euphemism for dying violently and often in gunfights. At its peak population in the 1880s, Tombstone had a population of 7,000 residents. Its current population in 2024 is about 1,300. Number 8, Calico, California. The Boom. Calico was another booming silver mining town in the late 19th century, with a population of around 1,200 people at its peak. The town had over 500 mines, producing millions of dollars worth of silver and borax. If you don't know, borax is a powdery white substance also known as sodium borate. It's still used to this day as a cleaner, but it's, fallen out of fashion. But when I was a kid, everyone had a box of borax in their house. The bust. The decline of silver prices in the mid-1890s led to the closure of many of the mines, and the town's population quickly dwindled. By 1904, Calico was largely abandoned. The town was later restored in the 1950s and is now a popular tourist destination known as the official Silver Rush ghost town of California. Calico trivia? Calico was restored in the 1950s by Walter Knott, founder of Knott's Berry Farm. He turned it into a tourist destination, and the town's current appearance reflects his vision of the Wild West. And if you've never been to Knott's Berry Farm, this family, or that man, had a little bit of an obsession with the Old West, because they got this whole Old West theme going on there. At its peak, Calico's population in the 1880s was about 1,200. Their current population? 0. It is preserved as a tourist attraction. Number 7, Garnet, Montana. The Boom. Garnet was a prosperous gold mining town in the late 19th century, attracting hundreds of miners and their families. The town featured several hotels, saloons, and a school, serving as a bustling community in the Montana mountains. The bust. The gold veins in Garnet began to run out in the early 20th century, leading to the town's decline. Many residents left, and a fire in 1912 destroyed much of the town. By the 1940s, Garnet was largely abandoned. Today, it is preserved as a ghost town and a historic site. It's well preserved, too. It looks really nice. Here's the Garnet trivia. Garnet is one of the few ghost towns in the U.S. that offers cabins for rent to tourists who want to experience living in a ghost town. The town is also one of the most well-preserved ghost towns in Montana. Montana's got a lot of them. At its peak population, Garnet had 1,000 residents, and that was in the 1890s. Their current population? 0. It is a ghost town. Number 6, Glenrio, Texas and New Mexico. Yes, this one straddles the border of Texas and New Mexico. The Boom. Glenrio thrived in the early 20th century as a stop along Route 66, or Route 66, however you want to say it, serving travelers with a gas station, motels, and cafes. The town straddled the Texas-New Mexico border and was a popular rest stop for those driving the Mother Road, as it's called. Yeah, basically this was a, truck stop type thing that blossomed into a small town. The bust. The construction of Interstate 40 in the 1970s bypassed Glenrio, leading to a sharp decline in business. Without traffic, the town's economy collapsed, and it was largely abandoned. Today, it is a ghost town, with remnants of once thriving businesses still visible. Piece of Glenrio trivia: Glenrio was unique that it straddled the Texas-New Mexico state line, with businesses taking advantage of differing state laws. For example, the Texas side had a bar, while the New Mexico side had a gas station because of more lenient laws when it came to gasoline. At its peak population, Glenrio only had about 50 residents, and that was between the 1930s and the 1940s. Their current population is 0. It's a ghost town, not even a cool ghost town with an old Western theme to it. Number 5, Picher, Oklahoma. The Boom. Picher was a major lead and zinc mining town in the early 20th century, contributing significantly to the U.S. war effort during both World Wars. The town had a peak population of about 14,000 and was a bustling community with schools, businesses, and churches. Everybody here had a job. The bust. Extensive mining led to an environmental nightmare that included contaminated groundwater and dangerous subsidence from collapsed mines. The Environmental Protection Agency declared Picher a Superfund site in the 1980s. By 2009, the government had evacuated the entire town, and it was officially closed due to health and safety risks. Picher trivia. Picher was one of the most toxic towns in America due to lead contamination. The town's environmental disaster was so severe that it became the subject of several documentaries and was used as a filming location for post-apocalyptic movie scenes. Picher's peak population was in the 1920s, where they had 14,000 residents. Their current population, 0. It is officially closed and abandoned. If you're caught there without permission, you could get in trouble. Number 4, Kennecott, Alaska. The Boom. Kennecott was a thriving copper mine in the early 1900s. The discovery of rich copper deposits led to the establishment of the Kennecott mines, which produced significant quantities of copper ore, fueling the town's rapid growth. They had to be pulling a good amount of copper there because there is nothing out here. I mean, your nearest neighbors out here are a small town of nothing called McCarthy and a glacier. The Bust. The town declined after the copper deposits were exhausted by the 1930s. The Kennecott mines closed in 1938, and the town was abandoned shortly thereafter. Today, it's a historic landmark and a popular destination for tourists interested in mining history. Kennecott trivia. Kennecott's copper was so pure that it was used to make the wiring for the Statue of Liberty. The town was once home to the world's richest copper mine, and its extraction methods were considered revolutionary for the time. Its peak population was in the 1920s with 300 people. Current population, 0. It is abandoned and part of a National Historic Landmark. Number 3, Cahaba, Alabama. The Boom. Cahaba, founded in 1819, was Alabama's first state capital and a thriving river town. It's at the confluence of the Alabama and the Cahaba rivers. It grew rapidly as a political and commercial center. The Bust. Flooding and the decision to relocate the state's capital to Tuscaloosa in 1826 led to Cahaba's decline. By the Civil War, it was nearly abandoned, and after the war, it became a ghost town. Today, it's an archaeological site known as Old Cahaba. Trivia. Cahaba is rumored to be haunted. Visitors have reported seeing ghostly figures, especially in the area known as the New Cemetery, where Confederate soldiers were buried. The peak population in Cahaba in the 1820s was around 1,000 residents. Current population, 0. It is an archaeological site. Number 2, Jerome, Arizona. It's kind of weird talking about Jerome because there's people still living there, and we just talked about it maybe 2 weeks ago. But anyway, the Boom. Jerome was a booming copper mine in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, known as the wickedest town in the West. It grew rapidly with a population that reached 10,000 at its peak, driven by the demand for copper during World War II, the Bust. After the demand for copper declined post-World War II, the mines closed and the town's population plummeted. By the 1950s, Jerome was on the verge of becoming a ghost town. However, it later revived itself as a tourist and artist community, reserving its historical character. Jerome trivia. Jerome is also known as America's most vertical city due to its location on the side of a steep hill. The town was notorious for lawlessness during its boom years, and it was said that every other building in Jerome was a saloon or a brothel. At its peak population, like I said, they had 10,000 people in the 1920s. Their current population in 2024 is about 450. Here's the question that you can answer in the comments section. In the 1980s, Americans went to giant malls, or big malls, whatever you want to call them, not your little corner ones, in between 5 and 7 times on average a month. By 2020, it was less than once a month. How often do you go to a major mall, and which one is it? All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Bodie, California. You learn all about Bodie if you grow up in California. It's part of our California history in school. The boom. Bodie was one of the most famous gold rush towns in California, booming in the late 1800s after the discovery of gold. The town quickly grew to over 10,000 residents, with dozens of saloons, churches, and a bustling red light district. The bust. By the early 20th century, the gold started to run out and the town began to decline. A series of fires further devastated Bodie, and by the 1940s, it was largely abandoned. Today, it stands as a well-preserved ghost town, attracting tourists interested in its history. Trivia about Bodie. Bodie is often cited as one of the best preserved ghost towns in the US. The town is so well preserved that there's a curse associated with removing artifacts from the town, they say. Visitors who have taken objects, even small ones like rocks or nails, have reportedly experienced bad luck until the item is returned. Sounds like a Brady Bunch episode. At its peak population, like I'd said, Bodie had about 10,000 residents. That was in the 1880s. Currently, population 0. It is preserved as a ghost town. All right, that's today's video. If you like this one, you'll probably like one of the 2 being suggested to you right now. Go ahead and give those a look. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.